Have you ever been afraid to speak English because you might make a mistake? You're not alone. Let me tell you how Arya Stark, went from avoiding English conversations to speaking confidently with my friends and family. It all started with a simple challenge from my friend Jon Snow, and it changed everything. Want to know how I did it? Keep reading to discover the steps that transform my English skills and help me speak with ease. My name is Arya Stark, and I want to tell you the story of how I learned to speak English better. It wasn't easy at first, but I didn't give up. You see, I could already write in English pretty well. When I had to write a letter or a short story, I didn't struggle much. I could also understand what people said in English. If someone spoke to me, I knew what they meant most of the time. But there was one big problem. When it came to speaking English, I just couldn't do it well. Every time I tried to say something in English, I felt nervous. My words didn't come out right, and sometimes I said the wrong thing. I thought that if I made mistakes, people might laugh at me. Because of this, I started avoiding conversations in English altogether. If someone asked me something, I would either answer very quickly in my own language or just stay quiet. I was afraid of embarrassing myself, and that fear made me feel stuck. But then something wonderful happened. One day, I was sitting by the fire in Winterfell with my best friend, Jon Snow. Jon is kind and always encourages me to do better. He noticed that I was quiet and asked, "Arya, why don't you talk in English more often? You're so good at understanding it." At first, I didn't know how to respond, but then I told him the truth. I said, "Jon, I'm scared. Every time I try to speak English, I make mistakes. What if people laugh at me?" Jon looked at me with a big smile and said, "Arya, everyone makes mistakes. That's how we learn. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to try. From now on, let's practice together. When we're talking, let's only speak in English. I'll help you." His words gave me hope. I felt like I could trust him because he wouldn't laugh at me or make me feel bad. That single conversation with Jon was the moment everything began to change. It made me realize that I didn't need to be afraid of speaking English anymore. All I had to do was start, even if it was just a little bit at a time. That conversation became the first step in my journey to becoming better at speaking English. It was a cold, chilly afternoon in Winterfell. The wind outside was howling softly, and snowflakes danced in the air, covering everything in a white, fluffy blanket. Inside the castle, Jon and I were sitting by the warm, crackling fire. The flames flickered and popped, making the room feel cozy despite the icy weather outside. We each held a steaming cup of tea in our hands, the warmth of the cup making my cold fingers feel better. Jon looked at me with his usual kind and curious expression. "Arya," he said, breaking the comfortable silence, "why do you always avoid speaking English? You're so good at writing it. I've read your notes and letters. They're amazing. But when it comes to speaking, you always seem quiet." I looked down at my tea, feeling a little embarrassed. I hesitated for a moment, then decided to tell him the truth. "Jon," I began, my voice soft, "I'm afraid of making mistakes. Whenever I try to speak English, the words feel stuck in my mouth. They don't come out right, and I feel like everyone will laugh at me or think I'm not good enough." Jon's face softened, and he smiled gently. "Arya," he said, his voice calm and reassuring, "everyone makes mistakes. I make them too. But mistakes are how we learn. You'll never get better if you don't try. The important thing is to start. You have to take that first step." I looked at him, unsure. "But what if I make a lot of mistakes?" I asked. Jon chuckled and said, "Then you'll learn a lot faster. Mistakes aren't something to be afraid of. They're just part of the journey. I have an idea. From today, let's only speak in English when we're with each other. We'll practice together. I'll help you, and you'll see that it's not as scary as it seems." His words made me feel a little better, but I was still nervous. "Are you sure this will work?" I asked hesitantly. Jon nodded with confidence. "Yes, Arya. I'm sure. You're brave in so many ways. You just need to trust yourself when it comes to speaking English. Let's do this together." Though my heart felt like it was racing, I nodded slowly. "Okay," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "I'll try." Jon smiled proudly. "That's the spirit. We'll start right now. What do you want to talk about?" That was the first step in my journey toward improving my English through conversation. It wasn't easy, but at that moment, I decided to take a leap of faith and trust Jon's advice. Little did I know, this small decision would lead to big changes in my life. Jon was true to his promise, and he made sure to keep his word. The very next morning, as the sun rose over Winterfell and the chilly air brushed against my face, Jon walked up to me in the courtyard. His face was bright, and he greeted me in a cheerful voice, speaking in English. "Good morning, Arya. Did you sleep well?" I stood there for a moment, my heart racing. My mind was searching for the right words to respond. Speaking in English wasn't easy for me, and I felt nervous. But I took a deep breath, looked at Jon, and slowly replied, "Yes, I slept well. And you?" Jon smiled warmly and gave a little nod. "Good job," he said. "See, it's not so hard." His voice was full of encouragement, and I felt a spark of confidence in myself. From that day on, Jon made it a habit to speak to me in English. At first, it felt a bit strange, but he didn't rush me or make me feel bad if I struggled. Instead, he kept the conversation simple and easy. We talked about little things we saw around us or did during the day. For example, one morning, Jon asked, "What did you eat for breakfast?" I thought for a second and replied, "I ate bread and eggs." He smiled and asked, "Was it tasty?" I nodded and said, "Yes, it was." These small exchanges were like little steps on a long staircase. Each time I spoke, I felt just a bit more confident. At first, I worried that my words weren't perfect. I thought I needed to use big, fancy words to sound good. But Jon taught me that wasn't true. You don't need big words to talk to someone, Jon told me one afternoon. Just say what you feel, even if it's simple. What matters is that you're speaking. We kept our conversations easy, talking about things like the weather. Jon would say, "It's sunny today. Do you like sunny days?" And I would reply, "Yes, I like sunny days. They are warm." Sometimes we talked about food. Jon would ask, "What do you want to eat for dinner?" And I would answer, "I want to eat soup and bread." Day by day, those little talks made me feel braver. I realized that I didn't need to worry about making mistakes. As long as I kept trying, I was learning. Talking to Jon in English every day became something I looked forward to. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about practicing. Each word I spoke was like a small victory. And with every conversation, I felt stronger. Jon's kindness and patience helped me believe in myself. Slowly, I started to see that speaking English wasn't as scary as I thought. It was just about taking one small step at a time. One sunny afternoon, Jon and I were sitting under a big tree in Winterfell. The birds were chirping, and the air smelled fresh. Jon and I had been practicing our English, just like we promised each other. I was feeling a little more confident that day, so I decided to tell Jon about my morning. I looked at him and said, "Jon, I cook lunch." The moment those words left my mouth, Jon's face changed. He looked surprised for a second, and then he started laughing, really laughing, so hard that he almost fell off the bench. I could feel my cheeks turning red. I felt so embarrassed. "What's so funny, Jon?" I asked, even though I already knew I had said something wrong. Jon tried to stop laughing, wiped a tear from his eye, and said, "Arya, that was so close, but not quite right. You wanted to say, I cooked lunch, right?" I nodded, still feeling shy. "Yes, that's what I meant," I mumbled. Jon smiled warmly at me and said, "Arya, don't feel bad. Everyone makes mistakes. Mistakes are like little stepping stones on the road to getting better. If you never make a mistake, you'll never know how to improve." I looked at him and said, "Really? So, it's okay to mess up?" Jon nodded and said, "Of course. That's how we learn. You just learned something new today. Next time, you'll know to say, 'I cooked lunch.' See, it's not a mistake anymore. It's a lesson." His kind words made me feel so much better. Instead of being embarrassed, I started to feel proud that I was learning. From that day on, I stopped worrying about making mistakes. Whenever I said something wrong, I told myself, this is just another way to learn. Jon's laughter that day wasn't to make fun of me. It was to remind me that learning can be fun, even when we make mistakes. After all, even Jon probably made mistakes when he was learning. This is your new vocabulary notebook. From now on, every time you hear or read a new word, write it down here. Then we'll use those words in our conversations. At first, I wasn't sure how this little notebook would help, but Jon's enthusiasm made me want to try it. I took the notebook from him, and from that moment, it became my little treasure. Every time I heard a new word, whether from Jon, a book, or even while listening to others talk, I quickly wrote it down in my notebook. For example, one day, Jon said, "This soup is delicious." I stopped and asked, "What does delicious mean?" He smiled and explained, "It means very tasty, better than just tasty. It's a word you can use when something tastes amazing." I wrote it down in my notebook. Delicious instead of tasty. Another time, I was feeling very happy because Jon and I had won a game together. Jon said, "You look so excited." I was curious again. "Jon, what does excited mean?" He explained, "It's a stronger way to say you're very happy or thrilled about something." Again, I added it to my notebook. Excited instead of happy. There was also a day when Jon said, "Let's discuss our plans for tomorrow." I paused and asked, "What does discuss mean?" He replied, "It means to talk about something in detail." I loved how this word sounded and wrote it down immediately. Discuss instead of talk. Every night before bed, I opened my notebook and read through the words I had collected that day. I practiced saying them out loud, making sure I remembered how to use them. At first, it was tricky. Sometimes I would forget a word when I needed it, or I would hesitate to use it because I wasn't sure if I was saying it right. But Jon always encouraged me. He would say, "It's okay, Arya. Just keep practicing. You're doing great." During our conversations, Jon would gently remind me to use the new words I had learned. For example, if I said, "This food is tasty," he would smile and ask, "Is it tasty or is it delicious?" I would laugh and quickly correct myself, "It's delicious." With time, The words in my notebook started feeling like old friends. They became a natural part of the way I spoke. I didn't have to think so hard anymore. They just came to me. My conversations with Jon became more colorful and exciting because I had so many interesting words to use. The vocabulary notebook wasn't just a tool. It became a part of my daily routine. It taught me that learning new words doesn't have to be scary or difficult. It can be fun and exciting, especially when you have someone like Jon to encourage you along the way. One sunny morning, Jon came to me with a big smile on his face. I could tell he had something important to say. He sat down beside me and said, "Arya, you've been working so hard on your English, and you've improved a lot. I think it's time for you to take the next step." I raised my eyebrows and asked, "The next step? What do you mean?" Jon smiled and replied, "It's time for you to practice speaking with other people, not just me. You've done so well in our conversations, but now you need to try talking to Sansa, Bran, and others. It will help you get even better." At first, I felt my heart race. The idea of speaking English with other people made me nervous. I whispered, "But Jon, what if they laugh at me? What if I make mistakes?" Jon looked at me kindly and said, "Arya, everyone is learning something new. Do you laugh at me when I make mistakes in sword practice?" I shook my head and said, "Of course not. I know you're trying your best." He nodded and said, "Exactly. Your friends won't judge you either. They'll be happy to help you, just like I am." His words gave me a little bit of courage. I decided to give it a try. The next day, I saw Sansa sitting in the garden, reading a book. I hesitated for a moment, then reminded myself of what Jon had said. I walked over and said, "Hello, Sansa. What are you reading?" She looked up and smiled. "Hi, Arya. I'm reading a book about castles. What about you? Do you have a favorite book?" Her question caught me off guard, but I took a deep breath and replied, "My favorite book is The Tales of the North. It is very interesting and exciting." Sansa's smile grew wider. "Oh, I've heard of that book. What do you like about it?" I paused to think and then said, "I like the adventure. The characters are brave, and the story makes me happy." Sansa nodded and said, "That's a great choice, Arya. Maybe I'll read it too." Her kindness made me feel good. I realized that talking in English wasn't as scary as I thought. Later, I saw Bran playing with his wooden toys. I decided to practice speaking with him too. I walked over and said, "Hello, Bran. What are you doing?" He looked up and said, "Hi, Arya. I'm building a tower. Do you want to help me?" I smiled and said, "Yes, I want to help. Your tower looks very nice." As we played together, we talked more. I said things like, "The tower is tall," and "Be careful, it might fall." Bran didn't laugh at my simple sentences. Instead, he nodded and kept building. The more I spoke with Sansa, Bran, and others, the more confident I felt. At first, my sentences were very short, like "I like this" or "that is good." But over time, I started saying more. For example, when Sansa asked me, "What did you do today?" I replied, "I practiced English with Jon. We talked about food and books." When Bran asked, "What is your favorite animal?" I said, "My favorite animal is a wolf because it is strong and loyal." Each conversation made me feel a little braver. I also noticed something interesting. Everyone spoke English in their own way. Sansa spoke slowly and clearly, which helped me understand her words easily. Bran spoke quickly and used some new words that I hadn't heard before. Talking to different people helped me get used to different speaking styles. I learned to listen carefully and ask questions when I didn't understand something. For example, when Bran said, "This tower is fragile," I asked, "What does fragile mean?" He explained, "It means it can break easily." Soon, speaking in English became a part of my daily life. I didn't feel as nervous as I used to. Instead, I felt excited to talk to my friends and learn new things from them. Every small conversation taught me something new, and I realized that practicing with different people was one of the best ways to improve my English. From that day on, I promised myself to never be afraid of speaking. Each conversation was a chance to grow, learn, and connect with others. To make learning fun, John and I started playing word games in English. John told me that games could make learning easier and more exciting. One of our favorite games was called 20 Questions. In this game, John would think of something in his mind, like an object, a place, or even an animal. My job was to guess what he was thinking about by asking questions. But there was a catch. I could only ask questions that could be answered with a yes or a no. At first, I was a little nervous because I didn't know what kinds of questions to ask. But John encouraged me and said, "Arya, just start with simple questions. You'll get better as we play." So, we began. John smiled and said, "Okay, I'm thinking of something. Ask your first question." I thought hard and asked, "Is it a living thing?" John nodded and said, "Yes." Now I had a clue. I asked my next question, "Is it an animal?" John smiled and replied, "Yes, it is an animal." This made me even more curious. I wanted to figure out what animal John was thinking of. I decided to ask another question. "Does it live in Winterfell?" I asked, remembering the animals we often saw around us. John shook his head. "No, it doesn't live in Winterfell," he said. This made me think even harder. If it didn't live in Winterfell, then it had to be something unusual. Suddenly, an idea popped into my mind. I looked at John and asked, "Is it a dragon?" John's face lit up, and he clapped his hands. "Yes, you got it. It's a dragon," he said, laughing. I felt so proud of myself for figuring it out. John said, "Great job, Arya. You asked the right questions to guess what I was thinking." That's how you play 20 questions. We kept playing the game every day. Sometimes John would think of simple things, like a chair or a tree, and other times he would pick tricky ones, like a castle or a cloud. I learned how to ask smarter questions like, "Is it something you can touch? Is it big or small? Does it make a sound?" The game was not only fun, but also very helpful. It made me think quickly in English, and I practiced forming questions in my head. John would always encourage me, saying, "You're getting better at this, Arya. Keep it up." Playing 20 questions became my favorite part of the day. It was like solving a little mystery every time. The more we played, the more confident I felt speaking in English. I realized that learning could be exciting and enjoyable, especially when it felt like a game. This simple game taught me so much. It helped me practice asking questions, think faster, and have fun while learning English. If you want to learn English, try playing 20 questions with your friends. It's a great way to improve while having a lot of fun. One day, John sat me down and said, "Arya, I want to teach you a very simple but powerful trick to help you speak English better." I was curious and leaned in to listen closely. He smiled and explained, "The trick is to think directly in English. Most people think in their native language first, and then try to translate their thoughts into English. That takes a lot of time and makes it harder to speak fluently." I frowned a little, trying to understand. "But John, how can I think in English if I'm not good at it yet?" I asked. John nodded and said, It's okay to feel that way at first. Everyone starts small. The key is to try thinking about simple, everyday things in English. You don't need to use difficult words or long sentences. Start with the basics. I'll give you an example. When you're brushing your hair, instead of thinking in your native language, tell yourself in English, I am brushing my hair. I thought about it for a moment and decided to give it a try. The next morning, as I picked up my hairbrush, I whispered to myself, I am brushing my hair. It felt strange and awkward at first, but I kept going. Then, as I walked to the garden later that day, I said quietly in my mind, I am walking to the garden. It was harder than I expected. My thoughts kept slipping back into my native language, and I had to remind myself to think in English again. I told Jon about my struggles, and he encouraged me. That's normal, Arya. It's like learning a new habit. It feels strange at first, but the more you practice, the easier it gets. Just keep trying. I took his advice seriously. I started practicing this trick every day, little by little. When I drank water, I thought, I am drinking water. When I put on my shoes, I thought, I am putting on my shoes. When I looked out of the window, I thought, the sky is blue. The trees are green. As days turned into weeks, something amazing began to happen. Thinking in English became easier. My mind slowly stopped translating from my native language, and the English words started coming naturally. I didn't even have to think so hard anymore. It just flowed. One day, Jon noticed the change. He said, Arya, do you realize how smoothly you're speaking English now? That's because you trained your brain to think in English. You're not just learning a language. You're living it. Thinking in English didn't just make my speaking faster. It made me feel more confident. I realized that when I didn't have to translate every word in my head, I could focus more on what I wanted to say. This trick, which seemed so simple at first, turned out to be one of the most important steps in my journey to speaking English fluently. Now, I tell everyone who wants to learn English, start small. Begin by thinking about your daily activities in English. Don't worry about mistakes or being perfect. Over time, your brain will get used to it, and English will become a natural part of your thoughts. Just like it did for me. One day, I was sitting with my friend Jon, and we were talking in English just like we always did. But this time, Jon looked at me and said something that made me feel really happy. He said, Arya, do you realize how far you've come? You can hold full conversations in English now. When he said that, I felt so proud of myself. I had worked so hard every day, trying to speak English better. But for a moment, I didn't really believe it was true. I thought, I can speak in English now. I smiled and replied, yes, and it's all thanks to your encouragement. I wanted to tell him that I couldn't have done it without him. He had been so kind, helping me practice and never letting me give up. But Jon looked at me with a kind smile and shook his head. He said, no, Arya, you did this. You put in the effort, practiced every day, and never gave up. Jon told me that it wasn't just his help that made me good at speaking English. It was my own hard work that helped me get better. I was the one who practiced, and I was the one who kept trying, even when I felt nervous or scared. His words were really special. I thought about them for a long time. I realized that when we try our best and don't give up, we can do anything we want to do. Confidence, which means believing in yourself, doesn't come from others. It comes from inside of you. When we believe in ourselves and keep trying, we can do amazing things. After hearing Jon's words, I felt so much better. I wasn't scared anymore to speak in English. and I knew I could keep getting better. And even though Jon helped me a lot, it was my own belief in myself that made the biggest difference. I understood that the more I practiced, the better I would get. And that gave me the courage to keep learning and speaking every day. So, just remember, if you keep trying, believe in yourself, and never give up, you can do anything. Even when things feel hard, just keep practicing, and you will improve. It's all about having confidence in yourself. I want to tell you a little secret about how I learned to speak better English. When I started learning, I was very shy. I didn't know many words, and I was scared of making mistakes. But I kept practicing, and now I want to share what helped me the most so you can learn English too. Here are some tips for you to try. At first, I didn't know how to say many things in English. But guess what? I started with little things. For example, I would say simple things like, hello, or how are you? It was easy and I felt proud. You don't need to say big words right away. Just start with little sentences like, I like apples, or I'm happy. And guess what? The more you practice, the bigger your sentences will get. So don't worry about starting small, because every little word counts. Do you know what? It's okay to make mistakes. Everyone makes them. When I was learning English, I made many mistakes. I said things wrong, but that was okay. Mistakes help you learn. If you say something wrong, someone will correct you, and you will remember the right way. It's just like when you first learned how to walk or ride a bike. You might fall sometimes, but then you learn how to do it better. So don't be afraid to make mistakes. It's the best way to get better. When you learn new words, try to use them in your conversations. It's like when you learn a new toy or game. You want to play with it a lot because it's fun. The more new words you learn, the more fun you will have speaking English. For example, if you learn the word happy, try to say, I am happy every day. Soon, you'll know so many words, and you'll feel great using them in your sentences. One of the best ways to learn English is by talking to other people. You can practice with your family, friends, or even with your teachers. Every time you talk to someone, you get better. You can ask simple questions like, what is your name? Or what do you like to do? And when they answer, try to listen carefully. Don't worry if you don't understand everything right away. Keep trying, and soon you'll be able to understand more and more. Learning English doesn't always have to be serious. You can make it fun. Play games like Simon Says or I Spy. These games can help you learn new words and practice speaking in a fun way. You can also sing songs in English, watch cartoons, or read books. The more fun you have, the easier it will be to learn. When you enjoy learning, it won't feel like work at all. If my story inspires you, I encourage you to start your own journey of speaking English confidently. Remember, every small step brings you closer to your goal. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and comment your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, English Tone, and hit the bell icon to join us on more exciting language learning adventures. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.